So welcome to our DWI Marktinfo seminar today about the British market. My name is Michael Schemmel and I'm the marketing manager at the German Wine Institute responsible for the UK market. Today we've invited 4 speakers for our session who are experts in their field, and we will start with Nikki Forrest and Connie Kissock, who are based in London for our Wines of Germany office there, working for Nikki at least for more than 20 years for us, and knows the market very well. And they will both talk about trends and market figures and introduce some of our activities that we are planning for this year. And they will be followed by Jamie Evanell and Rebecca Long, who are from the C&C Group, which is the largest drinks wholesaler in the UK. And we are glad that we have them here, giving us some insights about their view from the trade side, and also explaining a little bit what a producer needs to consider when he wants to enter the market. So we are very much looking forward to that. And before we start, I'd like to mention that we will record the seminar, and you will be able to watch the video on our website in the export portal. So you can also watch that afterwards again. And this is also the place where we will upload the presentation, so you don't need to take notes or pictures. So you can access the presentation afterwards as well. If you have any questions, please use the chat function, and I will pass on your questions after each presentation, and then we will hopefully be able to answer all of your questions. So then I would like to hand over to Nikki and Connie, and welcome to our seminar.
Good morning, everyone. I can't see you, but I've got a list of who's there. So some of you I know, and it's great to have some old faces in the audience, and some are new. So welcome to you as well. Connie, is the presentation shared on the screen? I can't see it anymore.
Yes, it is.
It is brilliant. Okay, so I think Michael, you've stolen my thunder on the first slide, where I was just going to tell you what's about to happen. But can I add my welcome to Michael's welcome to Rebecca and Jamie from the C&C Group. We're so lucky to have them. It's an incredible business, C&C. They'll tell you all about it. They've done a lot with German wines over the years and potentially looking to do more. So if anybody knows German wines in the market, C&C do. So we're very lucky to have Jamie and Rebecca with us today. So just moving on to the team, obviously you've got me and Connie here today, but we also have Poppy and Martha, who are in the audience as well, and listening in. And if you ask questions on the chat, and all of us will be able to answer you. So welcome to them too. So the UK market overview. I've got a lot of slides here, and I've said to Rebecca, because Jamie, I think you're on a train, is that right?
No, I'm in a taxi at the moment, but I'll be at our office by the time we were on.
Exactly. So just tell me how long you want me to go on for, because I can go on for days already. Because Rebecca's got quite a croaky voice at the moment, so they're going to do a double act. So anyway, but that's my roundabout way of saying I've got a lot of information for you today, which is great. But what I want to do is just start by giving you an overview of what I'm going to talk about. And just to say that the UK wine market it's hugely diverse, it's hugely competitive, increasingly competitive year on year. And it is one of the most mature wine markets in the world, and one of the oldest wine markets in the world as well. We do produce wine, but we're not a huge producer of wines. So we import almost everything. So lots of opportunities for you and for other countries as well. It's a very dynamic and evolving industry, and there are opportunities, but you need to be strong and you need to be prepared to carve a niche and to understand the intricacies of the market, some of which I'll go into today. So we've got new data to the end of December that we can present to you, and we're going to look at the current landscape of the market. We'll outline the challenges as we go, and we'll look at the opportunities and the trends. We're going to look at consumer confidence and just how we're all feeling at the moment. We've got some sales data for you as well. We're going to look at the wine drinking population. You know, who is it that's drinking all of the wine in the UK? Who are these people? What do they look like? We're going to look at consumption frequency, involvement levels. That just means, you know, how interested people are in wine, how involved they are in the category. We'll look at wine buying queues, which are changing at the moment in the market. We'll look at some demographics as well, low and no, which is a very interesting area, obviously, for Germany. And we'll look at sustainability as well. And then after that, I've got a sort of a breakdown of how the market works. And I can go into, I wasn't going to go into too much detail. We'll see how we're doing on time, and we'll see how Jamie's doing as well. So I can have a bit of flex there. But we will send you this deck afterwards. So you'll have all of the information and the bits that I haven't had time to go through in detail, you'll be able to have a good look at, and then just come back to us and ask any questions that you need. So what are the challenges? Well, there are plenty. There are plenty of opportunities as well, but there are challenges. Brexit and import costs, you know, sourcing European wines now into the UK has resulted in lots of logistical complexities, which ultimately has an impact on affordability. So there are those challenges there. In the UK, there's a growing discount culture. We're quite used to promotions. We buy a lot of wine on promotion, buy a lot of food in the supermarket on promotion as well. And that does put pressure on producers to manage pricing and profitability, and has an impact as well throughout the whole of the supply chain. There's the dominance of supermarkets. That's not really anything new. In the off trade, in the retail sector, about 80% of wine is sold through the supermarkets. And in the last 6 months, if you ask regular wine drinkers, 83% of them say that they've bought wine in a supermarket in the last 6 months. So it's a very, very dominant channel. And it's certainly not for everybody. But there are other channels out there, which we'll talk about as well. And then, of course, price sensitivity, and this just isn't just a UK issue. Economic uncertainty means that customers are becoming more cautious with spending money, especially in premium price brackets. But again, there are opportunities, which we'll move on to now. So premiumization, and this again, I think is a global trend. It's not just the UK. Consumers are spending more on higher quality wines. I think the wines at a lower price point, obviously as prices are increasing all the time due to lots of reasons, but consumers are willing to spend more on higher quality wines, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail and show you how that is shaping the market. Alcohol moderation, again, this is another global trend. Low and no alcohol wines are increasingly popular. The whole sector is growing massively, both in the off-trade and the on-trade. And there are lots of reasons why people aren't drinking as much. We'll go into a bit more detail on that too. And sustainability is a growing opportunity, particularly with generation Gen Z and the millennials. So younger consumers tend to be more eco-conscious than older consumers. So there are opportunities there. So moving on, I thought it'd be a good place to start looking at consumer confidence, which will just help to sort of set the scene and give us some parameters really of how we're all feeling. Now, this chart does look slightly alarming, but actually it's incredibly simple. If we start with the boomers, and you can see they're a darker colour on the chart, and there are some statements here which are sort of negative on one side, if you like, and then positive on the other. So you're looking for who's more on the positive side at the start of this. So the boomers are looking in pretty good shape, actually, across the board. Their personal finances aren't doing too badly. You know, they're able to spend more on everyday goods. They're buying the same things that they normally do. They're not too squeezed, the boomers. If you look at Generation X, so that's sort of the next age level down, if you like, they're not feeling quite so well off. They're spending a little bit less on everyday goods, but they're not switching to cheaper products. They're just buying less. And I think this is what we're seeing perhaps in wine, is they're drinking less, but they're still spending money on wine. And I think that's a trend that we are seeing in the wine sector. And then if you look at millennials, their finances and spending, they're doing okay. They're going out a bit less and they're spending a bit less, but they're okay. And then Gen Z, finances and spending, they're doing well, and they're going out the same as before. So it's just, you know, if you look at the global political and economic landscape, it'll be easy to sort of feel the doom and the gloom. But when you actually dive down into it, consumer confidence is not quite at an all-time high, but it's not as low as you would think it would be, given the news that we have at the moment. So there is some consumer confidence in the market. And if you track back to 2023, it does seem to be improving across most of these groups in many areas. So moving on to some sort of hard sales data really over the last 5 years. You know, we're the largest importer of wine globally. Our market at the end of 2024 was valued at roughly 15 billion. It's a big market. We're a big importer. Now, of course, what we need to look at are sort of, you know, beyond the headline of us being a big wine imported country. You know, what are we looking at in terms of the forecast up to 2027? So if you look at 2021 to 22, there was a big drop off for all wine. But if you look on the far right and you look at the annual growth rate forecast for still wine, it's looking okay at -2. Sparkling does a little bit better. It's in a slightly strong position, but total wine is looking at -1.9. So when you compare that to what happened in 21 to 22, that suddenly starts like looking like growth. So, you know, it's a declining category. But if we're looking at a decline of 2% forecast up to 2027, and we look at where we've come from, we're not in too bad a shape. And I know that these are global trends as well. So just looking at the top 10 countries, the first thing you'll notice, you'll be looking for Germany. This is in the off trade. And Germany is now number 11. Portugal has sort of snuck in there and taken our place. But looking at on a philosophical level, if you look at it in broader terms, if you look at the volume column, there are lots of arrows going down. So there is a bit of growth. You've got some growth from France, New Zealand, and obviously Portugal. But you've got value growth from more countries. So you've got volume growth from 3 countries, but value growth from more countries. And that, again, just supports that people are buying less, but spending a bit more. Now, they're spending more for lots of reasons. Wine is getting more expensive. And you can see the prices there have all gone up by, you know, slightly increased. But I'd say that, you know, 3-4% is a significant increase. New Zealand stayed the same. It's the highest price point for wine in the UK. Well, actually, it's not. France is. It's the second highest. And that one has, New Zealand has stayed the same, but there's growth from all of the others. So looking at price points in a little bit more detail, we've got volume in blue and value in green. And you can see really quite a similar pattern. Anything over £7 is in the increase. There are some high gains between £8 and £9 if you look at volume, and if you look at value, it's a very similar pattern. And interestingly, if you look at wines 15 plus, there's a little uptick from from in terms of the size of the market and the increase there. So I think there are opportunities. I would say they're all over £7, and we don't want to be looking to be selling cheaper wines than that in the marketplace. There's no money in it, and there's no growth there. So if we look in the on-trade, the on-trade is struggling with volume and value across all countries. Prices, as you would expect, though, have increased, but it's negative numbers for all countries. You can see Germany is in there at number 10, and Portugal isn't in there. I'm not sure of the gap between us and Portugal. You don't get many Portuguese wines in the on-trade, I would say. So hopefully we'll stay there for a little while yet. The German price is not the lowest price. The US is the lowest, but we're not tracking as high as some of our European neighbours in terms of price, but we're number 10 in the on-trade. So the next chart I think is quite interesting. It's just looking at our overall wine drinking population. So if you look at 2022, which is the middle bank of figures there. So if you look at that, you'll see that that's our sort of the peak, if you like, of those three. So we've got 2019, we grew in 2022 and we're down in 2024, but we're still higher than 2019. Now, as I said earlier, there are lots of reasons why this is. The rising taxes, cost of living challenges, and the appeal of moderate alcohol consumption. So none of that is a surprise to you, but I think it's quite good to just have a look at the population in the widest way that we can. And then frequency, again, I think is another interesting thing. Wine drinking frequency has fallen. Now, if you look at the top bars there, you've got 2019, you've got 11%. In 2019, 11% of the wine drinking population were drinking every day in 19, and that's gone down to 9% in 2024. And if you look at people drinking 2 to 5 times a week, that's increased slightly, as has about once a week. And those drinking 1 to 3 times a month, i.e. not very often, has decreased. So I think if we look at why people are drinking less. So if you look on the next bar down, you see 27% of people are claiming that they are drinking less now than they were before. And the reasons that they give, well, I'm drinking less alcohol overall. They're trying to reduce the money they spend. They want to look after their well-being. They're just going out less, or they're drinking at home less often. So it needs to be more of an occasion for them to open a bottle of wine at home rather than an everyday occasion. So I think that's quite useful background information to have. Involvement levels, again, I think is another interesting one. So the pale green is high involvement, and that means people who are super interested in wine. And the darker colour is medium involvement, and the blue colour, the pale blue colour, is low involvement. So if we look at 2019, we've got our base figures there, and we look at 2024. What's very interesting is that has increased by quite a lot. So from 33% to 40%. Now, of that 40%, because these are the people that we're interested in, we've broken them down into categories. So, and this is, I think, where it gets interesting. So of that 40%, only 10% of them are Gen Z, 31% and growing are millennials. Gen X is 26% and boomers are 32% and declining. So it's great that we've got that bank of millennials in there. But what we need to do in order for for involvement to keep growing is to get our more Gen Zs into the sector, and that's its own issue and its own problem that the wine industry generally, and not just in the UK, is grappling with at the moment. So we're not likely to see involvement growing unless we can see some growth from Gen Z and keep growing that millennial sector. And then wine buying queues, I think, is always an interesting one. More and more people are looking at packaging, and I've always had this sort of thought about packaging, which, you know, the front label needs to look good enough that people pick it off the shelf and turn it round, and you make the sale on the back label. So if you look at packaging cues, they talk about here taste descriptions on the shelf or wine labels. So that's the back label. And I think that back label is super important. Appeal of the bottle and label design is increasing, 40% going up. And medals, and I will talk about medals probably just right at the end because it doesn't fit naturally anywhere in the presentation, but I will talk about competitions because I think that they are important. So we'll talk about that, but right at the end. And then you can see, I won't go into all the detail here, but you can see recommendation from friends and family is more important than from a wine writer or a wine critic, for example. And qualities, people are still looking for grape variety and country, and increasingly alcohol content. Now, what I don't know about the alcohol content, but what I suspect is 5 years ago, 10 years ago, people were looking for high alcohol content. Now they're looking for lower. I have nothing to back that statement up. And it would be great to see what Jamie and Rebecca think as well. But certainly when I'm buying wine, I'm now looking for a lower alcohol content. I was at a friend's house the other day and I had a 15% wine and I had 3 sips, went bright red. Just thought, well, I can't drink this. I'm not used to those wines anymore. But we'll talk about that and tax in a minute as well. Now, some of you will be familiar with the UK wine drinker portraits. This is something that was set up about 20 years ago by Wine Intelligence, who are now part of the IWSR group. And they've been tracked annually ever since. And they've segmented the wine drinking population into 6 segments. And basically there are 3 that are interesting for us. We don't really want to be talking to the senior bargain hunters, to be honest, and the kitchen casuals just aren't spending enough and they're not drinking and often enough, etc. But we want to be talking to the social newbies. I won't go into all the details, but they're younger and they tend to be quite experimental. They're not hugely knowledgeable, but they're up for giving interesting things a go. Adventurous explorers is a really key category for all wine countries, to be honest. They're older, they're 45 plus, they're confident and knowledgeable. They're not spending at such a high price, but they are drinking regularly and they are knowledgeable. And then we've got generation treaters who are a little bit younger. They're quite highly involved, they're experimental, and they're drinking at a higher price level. So they're very interesting for us as well. So again, you've got all the details there, but those are the 3 categories that are important. And I've got something here called a demographics dashboard, which is, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but I do want to look at age. So if you look at the on the top line, you can see the age bit. LDA is legal drinking age, so that's sort of the 18 to 24 category. And there are fewer, as the chart shows here, there are fewer people entering the category at legal drinking age. And in fact, there are fewer people up to the age of 44, and it increases at the age of 45. So the wine drinking population is getting older, and over 54s actually account for half the market. Again, I think that's a global trend. It's not just the UK, but I think it's just quite interesting to see it. And something that I won't talk about anywhere else is region. So we'll just touch on that now. You can see that the growth is coming from the Southeast and East Anglia, and that's a really key area. London, I think, is steady at the moment, but the growth is coming from, you know, the wealthy Southeast of England. But, you know, everywhere else, things are looking pretty stable. This one I think is just interesting, looking at wine styles. This is something that it is tracked on a 6-monthly basis. And I've only got data, I think, up to 2023 here. I don't have the 2024, but I think it's just worth looking at. If you look at white wines, the top attributes for white wines: crisp, easy to drink, fresh and fruity. Well, what does that sound like? It sounds like a German white wine to me. So I think that's an opportunity there, obviously. And then you look at red wines, we've got full-bodied, and we've got smooth, and we've got fruity. So apart from the full-bodied, and it'd be interesting to know where that tracks in 2024 and 2025, smooth, fruity, and rich. Would you say that the Spätburgunder is full-bodied? No, probably more on the elegant side, I would say, which is tracking at number 8. But definitely we've got all the indicators for white wines. And then low and no, which I think is a really important trend, but also hugely important for Germany. If we look at the off-trade first, so we've got no low lad. Lads are lower alcoholic drinks. It's basically beer and cider. So you can see that in terms of volume and value, that's growing in a very strong way, as is spirits. For wine, we're seeing a slower growth at 3% volume and 5% value. And for the whole sector, we can see some fairly significant growth. Just to let you know that lads, if you're looking sort of for a definition, it's up to 1.2% alcohol generally. And for wines, it's up to 5.5% alcohol, just so you've got those definitions there. Then if we look at the on-trade, is quite a different picture. The growth is pretty dramatic. If you look at the bottom there, you've got 53% growth in the total sector in terms of volume, and then 56% in terms of value. And if we look at wine, it's actually very small, but the growth is quite significant, and it's growing faster in the on-trade than spirits or lads. So definitely opportunities in the on-trade for low and no wines. And then I couldn't sort of let this opportunity pass me by for trying to explain the new duty brackets for alcohol levels. Some of you will know a bit about it. From February the 1st, the new tax duty escalator came into force. Until the 1st of February, we had sort of a temporary scheme. And if you look at that first column there, you can see at 11.5% alcohol, everything stronger than that was £2.67 in terms of the tax. From the 1st of February, anything over 12.5% is £2.67. So that has changed. But what's interesting for us, because German wines tend to be lower in alcohol, and certainly can be lower in alcohol, is that we're at a huge advantage. If you look at 14.5, you've got £2.99, £3.10. We're not making wines generally in that sector. We're making wines sort of 11.5, perhaps up to 12.5. So we've got a tax advantage on other producers. And I think that the IWSR report summarizes it quite well here in this quote. I won't read the whole thing, but it's Australia produces stronger wines because of its hot climate, whereas Germany produces lower ABV wines because of its cooler climate. The lifting of the duty easement on wine will accelerate the shift towards lower ABVs. So I don't think I need to go into too much more detail there, but there are definitely opportunities for lower ABV wines in the UK. And I don't know if some of you can remember back, and it's probably 20 years ago, I think, Michael, where the German sort of promotional campaign, the strapline was light and elegant naturally. And I think we were just 20 years ahead of the curve with that statement. We then moved on, and you know, we've moved on to other campaigns. But you know, light and elegant naturally is exactly where Germany is. And I think that that is a huge opportunity for us to go out there and grasp. I just want to talk about sustainability as well, before I summarize on the trends and find out where Jamie is. But sustainability is an interesting opportunity across the board, I think, but particularly with younger drinkers. So if we look at these charts here, the top row is all regular wine drinkers, so we can see our base here. And then the bottom row is high connection to sustainability. So if we look at the age column, so we've got Gen Z at 10% of all regular wine drinkers, but 14% in terms of those who are interested in sustainability, and you've got 28% for millennials. So the younger generation is more interested in sustainability, and you can see the boomers there, gone from 40% in terms of regular wine drinking to 32 in terms of connection to sustainability. So it's the younger drinkers who are interested in sustainability. The next slide shows you more detail on that. I won't go into it all, but you can see it's broken down by natural wine, organic wine, fair trade, etc., etc. So lots of buying cues here, if you like, and you can see by age category who's interested in what. And if you were just to glance at this and couldn't see any of the figures, you would see where the green is, and that's in the younger Gen Z and millennials, and you'll see where the red is, and that's in the boomers. But you can have a proper good look at that when we send the deck to you. So in summary, the summary of the market trends and what this means for Germany. Let's start with premiumization. Consumers are willing to pay more for quality wines with a strong provenance. So for Germany, let's focus on heritage, let's focus on craftsmanship and the uniqueness of your terroirs. Whatever it is that you have, leverage that storytelling around your winemakers, your traditions, and probably lead with Riesling and Pinot Noir. It's not to say don't talk about anything else, but and I think the C&C team will echo that, but lead with Riesling and Pinot Noir. Moderation, which we've just talked about, our opportunity there is to emphasize on naturally lower alcohol wines like an Elegant Naturally right there. Sustainability. So we've seen how younger consumers prefer sustainable, not prefer, actually, that's probably too strong a word, but are very open to sustainable wines. So let's showcase the region's organic and biodynamic producers. Germany over-indexes in organic and biodynamic producers. So let's talk about that. And then supermarket dominance. Shelf space is hugely competitive. The supermarkets have their role, but they're certainly not for everyone. There are lots of other channels which I'm about to dive into, so let's focus on those. And then price sensitivity. Wine buyers are cautious. They need to know what they're getting for their money. So we promote German wines as offering huge value for money, which they do, especially the mid-range wines that deliver that really super high quality, but without the price. So that's just a summary of some of the trends. Now, Jamie, you're in the office now, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Amazing. Well, that's not going to stop me, but I will do the shorter version of distribution channels to give you guys some time. So look, we've wanted to segment the market for you slightly, just so that you can see who does what effectively and how it works in terms of what the different distribution channels are. So we're just going to start with importers and agents. Most wine sold in the UK is imported by an agent, not all of it, but or an importer, but most of it is. And they play a hugely important role in sourcing wines from all over the world, and they'll manage logistics and legal compliance, which, as Rebecca will tell you, is very, very important. And they're brilliant at doing that job. And they really act as an intermediary, between the producers and the distributors or the retailers. So that is probably all I want to say about importers. Then we've got distributors and wholesalers. Now there is a bit of an overlap between these, and Jamie and Rebecca will if you've got any questions, will be able to answer them better than me. But they essentially bridge the gap between the importers and the end retailer, or the on trade, wherever they're selling into. And you have wholesalers that serve the on-trade. Matthew Clark's a great example there. And then you have others that just supply to independents or to supermarkets as well. So that's another important link in the distribution chain. Retailers, we've got our multiples, which we call our supermarkets. Tesco and Sainsbury's very much lead the way. You can see that 83% of consumers have bought a wine from a supermarket in the last 6 months, and that's up 40% on last year. So people are buying more and more wine in supermarkets. They're very important, but they come with their challenges, of course. So tread cautiously if you're a volume supplier. It can work very well for you, but if you're a smaller producer, and in fact there was something just last week that Majestic is stopping working with a number of their smaller producers because they just can't afford to work with them anymore. So take caution if you want to suddenly decide you want to go into the supermarket sector. Continuing along with retail, we've got our sort of multiple specialist retailers like Majestic, who I've just mentioned, and the Wine Society. Well, the Wine Society is purely online, in fact, but you do have these multiple specialists who are doing online as well. And then you've got the smaller retailers like Cambridge Wine Merchants, Oxford Wine. There are, I think, about 1,000 of them across the UK, and that sector's doing very well. There's a piece of research that happens every year from the Wine Merchant magazine. They do a survey every year, and you can see from 2019 to 2024 that the price per bottle has increased quite dramatically, ahead of market, and the average transaction, i.e., what's in your shopping basket, has gone up even more. So the specialist stores are where you'll find the more expensive wines. And that's where premium wine sales tend to happen. Then online is another interesting area. It grew dramatically, as you would expect during the pandemic. It flattened off a bit, but 10%, or just over 10% of wine sales take place online, and it's forecast to grow as well as we head into 2025, 26. So that's another important area potentially as well. And they sell wines from larger producers, but also a lot of wines from smaller producers as well. And then the on-trade is, I've just got one slide on it here. I probably could have had 5, but the on-trade, as we call it, and I think you call it Horeca, is wine sold through restaurants, pubs, wine bars, hotels for immediate consumption in the venue, on the premise. Sommeliers and wine buyers play a hugely influential role here in creating the whole list for the operator or for the venue. And the emphasis here is slightly different. Obviously, when people are buying wine in the pub or in a restaurant, you don't always see the bottle. So actually, storytelling is hugely important in the on-trade, especially in the premium on-trade. So many venues work closely with smaller importers or regional specialists or wholesalers. Occasionally, they will import your wines directly, but that's becoming less and less common, but it does happen. And that happens in the independent retail sector as well, but generally it's easier to go through an importer or a wholesaler. And these particular distributors, have a really good understanding of by the glass listing, educating the team who are selling the wine so they can hand sell, and providing point of sale materials and that kind of thing. In terms of what's working in the on-trade, the casual dining, or the mid sector, has had a lot of challenges recently, but premium on-trade has done really well, and is continuing to do well. And the spend per bottle is up 15% since 2019, again over-indexing there. So the premium sector is doing very well there. And then just finally, before I hand over to Connie, who'll do a quick whiz through our campaign, the trade, we just asked them what their thoughts are about Germany at the moment, what's going well and where the opportunities are. So Andrew Catchpole from Harper's said, yeah, we need to go for younger consumers, cool, funky labels, wines under a tenner. Anne Khabil, who you will know, talked about the fine wine market, classified sites, old vines, ageability. She sees an opportunity at the very, very premium end there. John Chapman, who's the CEO of Oxford Wine Company, talks about diversity, non-Riesling whites. He'd love to see more of those, Zect and Pinot Noir. And Richard Siddle, who's the editor of The Buyer, said target sommeliers and indies and merchants with diversity, which is something that we absolutely can do. Nick Darlington talked about high acidity white wines and i.e. Riesling and world-class Pinot Noir. Michael from ABS talks about high quality wines sub 10.5, which again, we can absolutely do. Isa Bar from Trivet talks about low alcohol as well, because that's something Germany can do with that rightness intention that other countries just can't. And then Pete McCombie talks about red wines with the potential to age. So lots of different opportunities there, but you do see some themes coming through. Now, Connie, I've probably left you 10 minutes to whiz through. Do it in 5, that would be...
No problem at all. Yeah, we'll quickly take a look at our campaign for Wines of Germany in the UK this year. So starting off with our strapline for this year, we really want to communicate how diverse, on-trend and exciting German wine is. So we're focusing on the strapline German wine, sometimes chilled, always cool. And we'll be working with both the on and off trade to do this, and also really looking to take the campaign beyond London and reach those regional cities that are calling out for more wine events and more engagement. So just a quick view of our timeline. We've already had one of our campaign elements, some sessions in London, but still a lot more to come throughout the year, which we'll talk about in a minute. So our next big part of the campaign is the Big G. So this is our annual trade tasting. We really wanted to take this beyond London this year. So we're going to be heading up to Edinburgh for an intimate tasting, looking at imported wines, as well as having a generation Riesling table. Gosh, losing my words this morning, to show the dynamic and exciting wines coming out of the country. So this will be quite an intimate event. We've got 8 importer tables. And we'll be finishing off the evening with a canapé supper and a Zect reception to really get that social element there. We've got a lovely terrace, so we're hoping for some nice weather at the venue. And we're sure the Scots will love to socialise throughout the evening. So it should be a good event.
It is looking less intimate now, though, isn't it? We've got over 100 people who want to come. So,
Yeah.
So yeah, which is great. Great to have a good audience in Edinburgh.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then the next element of our campaign, so we do this every year. We run educator sessions with the WSET school to really educate the educators and empower them to talk about German wines. So this year we're working with Shane Jones, who's a German wine expert. We've worked with him a lot before. And his session will be focusing on in the red, Germany beyond white wine. So really delving into all those red varieties, talking about Pinot Noir, but also bringing in the other grapes like Lemberger, Dornfelder, with 6 wines to taste in an online seminar. So yeah, it's set to be a really good session. And then, yeah, on to some sessions. So we've already had one of these this year. This is our educational series for the on-trade, really looking to empower sommeliers to upsell German wine and also persuade them to list more German wines, especially by the glass. So our first session was an in-person masterclass at a central London restaurant. We talked about German whites beyond Riesling, and that was hosted by Peter McCombie, who is a master of wine and also the co-chair of the International Wine Challenge. So we paired 6 German wines from a variety of different grape varieties and regions with Korean Japanese food. And our next session, which will be held in June, is going to be an online masterclass, and that will be hosted by Isa Ball, who's a master sommelier and also the co-owner of Trivet, which is a really premium London restaurant. And he'll be taking a deep dive into German reds, again looking at Pinot Noir, but also bringing in those other grape varieties so we can really communicate the diverse range of wines that Germany produces. And then next, our really exciting campaign, 31 Days. This is our biggest campaign throughout the year. Usually we look at 31 days of German Riesling, but we know that that's become a staple on the shelves of retailers and also on the restaurants' menus and wine bar menus. So we're looking to expand our campaign this year, and we're taking the focus to the full spectrum of German wine. We've renamed the campaign 31 Days of German Wine, so it will be a month-long celebration of everything that Germany produces, especially looking at those Pinot varieties, as we know there's a great opportunity for them in the UK. Okay, so we're switching up the campaign this year with some new elements like fully rebranded POS, which we'll send out to the retailers and other participants to help them really celebrate the campaign. We're going to be running an influencer campaign. We're also running a supermarket partnership with a major high street supermarket, Waitrose, so that we can really tap into that audience. We're going to be holding an educational seminar before the campaign starts, so that we can really upskill participants and allow them to communicate the diversity of German wine throughout the month. And this is a great opportunity if you do plan on coming over to visit any of your stockists or any of your importers to arrange time in trade, as they do love holding events with producers as well. And then a quick note on social media. So this is something that we run throughout the year. We have our Wines of Germany Instagram and Facebook that we regularly post on, but we also have a couple of bigger activations that we do throughout the year as well. So firstly, we have Riesling's birthday. So this happened in March. So we like to celebrate the day by working with influencers. So we ran a gifting drop. We created some lovely bespoke boxes with Riesling biscuits. So we had a bottle of Riesling and a little birthday cake that were in a bundle with some German wine. We sent those out to influencers to create some lovely content with, and also supporting that with a press alert to media too, recommending a few different German Rieslings. And our next big element for our social media campaign will be 31 Days of German Wine. As I just mentioned, we'll be working with some regional micro-influencers to create really tailored content, publicising 31 Days and the different participants. A lot of the participants run tastings, masterclasses, food pairing evenings, and more. So we want to get those influencers to publicise those events and get consumers into participating venues. And then finally, just a note on how you can get involved with our campaign this year. As always, make sure that you tag us in any content on our socials. We love to reshare it. Tell us about your new UK listings, so we can talk about those as well. And if you do have any events in the UK with importers, retailers, bars and restaurants, let us know. Again, we can publicise those as well. So now, yeah, we'll just hand over to Jamie and Rebecca, who will talk about navigating the UK market.
Thanks very much, Connie, and thank you, Nikki, for the invite to this. I often think that that generic bodies and PR agencies and importers aren't as joined up as they could be and should be, and if we worked closer together and talked a little bit more with each other, then we could make a massive difference in for the countries and categories that you work with in the UK and to all of our business and our sales. So really welcome the opportunity to come and talk here and talk a little bit about our business and what we do with German wine. So I'm the wine buying director for CMC Group, and Rebecca, who's joining me, is the buyer in my team who's responsible, amongst many other things, for German wine in our business. I'm going to talk a little bit at the start just about our group, just to give an overview. So, as Nikki said, we are the largest importer and distributor of wine in the UK. And made up of a large number of different parts to our business. So we're owned by a business called CNC. So CNC are beer and cider manufacturers by trade. The biggest brands that they have are Tennant's Beer, which is huge in Scotland, and Bulmers and Magners Cider, which are huge in Ireland particularly, but also in the rest of Great Britain as well. There's two great things that CNC does for us as a business, looking at it from a wine perspective, is A, distribution, because particularly in Scotland and Ireland, the distribution we have is immense because of the power of the brands that we produce. But also financial stability is really important as well, because making and producing and distributing beer and cider right from beginning to end is an awful lot more profitable than importing and distributing wine. So what that does for us from a wine perspective is gives us a really strong financial base. So we don't have to worry about cash flow in the same way that importers and distributors who just sell wine do, where you're often operating off a couple of % of margin. Within our business, I'm sorry if you just go back, Connie. On the left-hand side, basically, is all of our parts of business that deal with the on-trade. So we have two main on-trade businesses in Matthew Clark and Bibendum. Matthew Clark is very much composite wholesaler, selling lots of wine, more wine than Bibendum, in fact, but also lots of beer, lots of spirits, lots of soft drinks. Bibendum far more wine focused and far more focused on mid to upper end, whereas Matthew Clark also deals with bigger mainstream groups. That's our England on-trade distribution. Then in Scotland, we have a business called Tennent's, after the name of the beer. And in Scotland, we take a different approach and distribute both Matthew Clark and Bibendum products through the Tennent's distribution model because of the strength of the brand. We then have on-trade businesses in Ireland called Bibendum Ireland, and small businesses in Northern Ireland. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the businesses that we deal with off-trade. So Bibendum Off-Trade sells to all of the major multiple retailers. Walker Woodhouse is our business selling to independent retail. So that would be sort of smaller, from single site to maybe 9 or 10 different on-trade sites, but not as big as supermarkets. And then we have businesses looking at off-trade through Tennent's in Scotland and through C&C, looking at more international distribution, which is more our beer brands. So the idea of our business fundamentally is that we provide access to all different parts, all different segments of the UK market through different businesses, and act in the majority of cases as Winery's exclusive distributor for the UK. If you move on now, Connie, just a little bit more detail about how that all shapes up. For the on-trade, we are 30% market share of all wine sold in the on-trade in the UK. And within that, some particular strengths through Bibendum and Matthew Clark, we have a very strong footprint in national account business. And we would be one of only a couple of distributors who really have the ability to distribute to big on-trade businesses that spread over the whole of the GB island. Tennent's in Scotland, we have a particularly strong footprint, as I say, because of the strength of the Tennent's brand, which has something like 90% on-trade distribution and similar consumer recognition to Apple and Coca-Cola. So it's an amazingly strong brand. And we distribute 41% of all beers, wines and spirits in Scotland, so stronger there over other areas, although wine is a little bit below that, so we've got some catching up to do in terms of maximising the strength of that distribution. Matthew Clark, as I say, very strong in national accounts. And then in Ireland, we've got, again, a very strong footprint, again, because of the strength of the Bulmers and Magners cider brands in Ireland. And it's an area of the market which is growing for us and has a little bit of wine growth in it, which is quite unique, perhaps, for the total GB and Ireland market, in that in declining consumption is more of a trend than increasing consumption. So in Ireland, we have a little bit of growth in the market to help us as well. The next slide just shows just a little bit of detail just about our off-trade business. So we are the biggest importer and distributor that most off-trade retailers will deal with. We're a relatively small part of the off-trade market still within the scheme of things. So you've got a lot of big brand owners dealing directly with supermarkets, but we still have a very strong footprint for an importer and distributor. We focus on the plus £10 segment, which is in line with where our strength is in the on-trade as well, in the more premium areas. However, there is a reality in the off-trade segment, and when you look at where you're looking to target your brands, I think it's quite important in that although we focus in over £10, only 4% of wine sold in the multiple retail sector is sold above £10. 96% of it is sold below £10. And when you start to look at what XL or FOB prices translate into retail prices, it's a bit of, I guess, some reality and a little bit scary in terms of the amount of wine or the sold below that price point and above that price point. But we also increasingly focus on the £7 to £10 sector in retail with what we call scale-up brands, which is taking brands that have, as it says, some scalability and some potential to grow and scale. Because ultimately it's where a lot of the volume is in the UK market, but it's also where we can build long-term sustainable listings. The difficulty with wines above £10 in retail is often because it's only 4% of wine sold. Unless you've got a really strong brand proposition above that price point, you can sometimes find you in and out of supermarkets quite quickly. Whereas if you establish a strong brand with more marketing collateral and impetus and scale behind it, then you've got more chance of remaining in those multiple retailers in the long term. And then the next slide just shows a little bit about our Walker Woodhouse business. So this is our business that sells to independent retailers around the country. We've got a team of 10 that particularly focus just on this sector. And it's a sector where we sell largely the same wines that we sell in the on-trade, because there's no conflict between on-trade and independent retail. And you can sell more premium wine in this sector, as the slide showed on the average price point sold in this channel. You know, you're looking at more of an average point of 12, 13, 14, 15 pounds rather than the below 10 pounds in multiple retail. So it's a nice place to sell premium wine, which aligns with what we do. So I'll just pass to Rebecca now to talk a little bit about our German wine business, and then I'm going to come back a little bit with a little bit more on pricing in a bit.
Okay, good morning, everybody. It's nice to virtually meet you all. Please excuse my throat a little bit. I'm a little bit croaky, so just bear with me. So this is just a bit of an overview of Germany in the GB on trade. So I think echoes a lot of the points that Nikki was talking about earlier. So in the on-trade, Germany remains number 10 in still wine as a country of origin, and that equates to just over 34,000 9-litre cases. A kind of good stat is that Germany is outperforming the market. So whilst it's still declining 5% on last year, the total market is declining in over 7%. So Germany is still kind of outperforming the general sort of overall. By no surprise, Riesling accounts for over 70% of that volume. Something that I think is a really good bit to kind of hold on to for the on-trade is our insights team have a parameter that we look at called mode, which is where we look at the top 200 restaurants and bars, sort of top trending restaurants, and we look at their lists and analyse what they have. And Germany still equates for 90% of listings in those kind of top high caliber destination restaurants and bars. So other trends that we're sort of starting to see is Georgia and Lebanese wines on those lists, but Germany is still very much kind of holding its own in having that kind of listing in those premium kind of high caliber establishments. Can move on to the off trade. So not performing quite so well, so faring a bit worse in the off trade in terms of how Germany is kind of holding its own. So in Germany, in the off trade, Germany is underperforming market decline. So it's declined by 10% on last year, whereas the overall market is declining by 5%. It's very much dominated by sort of white blend and red blend styles of wine. So not really seeing that sort of the nuance of regionality or styles that we sort of all love and know about Germany. And that's not being represented by the multiple retailers and the larger sort of dominant part of off-trade. Another interesting fact is that well over 50% of the wines are under supermarket private labels. So that's where the supermarkets have their sort of own ranges where they're representing Germany. It's there, but we're just not getting, again, it's not representing the nuance of styles or regionality or personality and kind of reputation that Germany could be showing in the off-trade. And I think that again echoes with sort of 20% of total volume being under Black Tower, which I think again is not sort of helping the reputation of Germany within the larger multiple retailers. But that's where we see that there's huge opportunity in where we can continue to grow in on-trade and the independent retail and more premium sector for GB. In terms of Germany within C&C, so this is kind of our overall business, as Jamie was just talking through, kind of the benefit that we have is that we play in all different channels of the market, so we have a good overview. So Germany in terms of total C&C is about 11% share of our volume, again very much dominated by white wines, But interestingly, Riesling is just over 60%, so a little bit less than the overall market. And that's where we're seeing the opportunity for Pinot Noir in particular, which is growing from Germany within our business, but also Pinot Blanc, which I think, again, echoing some of the points that I think have come across in the presentation so far, particularly from this sort of wine critics in the trade, saying that a bit of diversity and uniqueness that could come through to support the strength of Riesling from Germany. I think that's a real area that we could kind of really play on. Sorry. So another area is that over a third of what we sell is through food-led and hotel segments. So a really strong kind of premium part of the trade, and where we know that we can really succeed with German wines.
I think just to expand on what Rebecca said about the off-trade, and so obviously when she's talking about the off-trade, she's talking about multiple retail rather than independent retailers, where Germany has much greater diversity and strength in line with on-trade. I think in the off-trade, I think there is an opportunity, and ultimately, we've seen the reputation and perception of German wine, really increase and change over the last sort of 10, 15 years in the on-trade and independent retail. And I think the off-trade ultimately lags a little bit behind that. It's a little bit more difficult because on an on-trade menu, you can navigate and you can recommend and you have a sommelier, whereas in the off-trade, Germany gets lumped in with others. So it's much more difficult to signpost towards it. But I think also, but ultimately within that, there's an opportunity for Germany to, if we have some more modern, more vibrant brands appearing on shelf in the off-trade, then ultimately the progress that Germany has made in the on-trade could be replicated in the off-trade in the future. I think possibly just needs a few multiple retail buyers to perhaps open their minds to a little bit of change and get on board with what's happened in the on-trade, which is part of what we try to do with off-trade retailers. We try to take on-trade trends to them, explain what's happening in the on-trade, how things are changing, and how they can replicate that. But it also needs some producers to come to us or other people with modern, vibrant, new brands that reflect what's happening in the rest of the market as well, and then we can try and tackle that together.
So in terms of kind of opportunity for German wines in the UK currently, Riesling will always be kind of a real mainstay and reputational element of German wines. Interestingly, in the on-trade in the last year, Germany remains number one as the country of origin for Riesling as a varietal, and is actually gaining share. So it's grown 9%. And that's directly from New World countries. So Australia, for example, Rieslings from Australia is in decline by 10%. So we can see that consumers are wanting to buy local, which for the UK, because we're obviously not making huge amounts of wine ourselves, very much kind of leads to looking at European countries, and that's where we're seeing decline in particularly kind of Australia and other long haul kind of air miles for wine. So there's a big opportunity there for Germany to kind of continue to build on that sort of more local origin of where we're importing wine from. Again, echoing kind of what Nikki said earlier in terms of light, refreshing, fruit-driven varietals, and this is where we see that there is opportunity for Pinot Blanc and Pinot Gris and other varietals from Germany and more indigenous grapes as well that stylistically play into what the consumer is looking for, but also as a way to hook in for younger consumers. So that Gen Z element that we're looking at, they are more keen to explore, they want to try new varieties, and they kind of are looking for that experimental element to invest in when they're trying new wines. So that's a huge area that we can see could be played upon. And then key is competitively priced Pinot Noir. So Burgundy is, as an obvious sort of comparison, increasing in price year on year. And in some elements, while people are looking after their money and what they're choosing to spend on, gives an opportunity for Pinot lovers to look further afield and find those really high quality wines, but for approachable sort of price points, and certainly competitive price points to some of those sort of astronomically increasing Burgundies. Sorry. So in terms of what we generally are looking for in a new producer, these are a few just kind of, I guess, bullet points, and it's not to say that's everything, but it's, you know, sort of, I think, aspects that we consider. So primary kind of big things are sustainable and ethical practices, and to a certain extent in there's almost an expectation that all wine producers are doing their bit, but it's what are producers doing that kind of go above and beyond just a general kind of level of sustainability. So some of the things that we look for in producers is more kind of outreach to local communities, so support in the regions that they're working beyond just their own kind of production and farming, but it's how do they support the local community or programs that they're a part of as a wider piece as well. So you know, green segments that they work with within Germany or within the region that they're operating in. Unique story, you know, the unique selling point of every bit, and in that we're kind of, you know, the personalities behind the wine, the history of the wine, the history of the regions, kind of how has it come about, but the people piece, I think, behind that is also very important. Reputation, both within the country of origin itself, but also on a global scale. So accolades, I know it's something that I think we might revisit again at the end, and it's not necessarily about sort of badges or labels on bottles, but just you know, what are the press write-ups, you know, where are the critics scores, particularly in independent retail where there's a huge opportunity for the more premium German wines. That's something that's a real talking point when our sales team from Walker & Woodhouse are going in and talking to their customers, you know, to get shelf space, to get sort of visibility within that arena, to have those sort of accolades and awards and reputational pieces is quite important and can really help support listings. Technical capabilities. We have our own technical team that visit a lot of our wineries, particularly if you're wanting to work in the multiple retail off-trade sector. That's a very important bit. There's accreditations that are required. And so as well as our own internal audits, there's also some kind of larger accreditations that are required if that's the avenue that you are looking at. For our business, scalability can be a good thing, as we've demonstrated. We're a large player in the UK and in Ireland, so for some of our producers we need that scalability and that ability to kind of grow with us. That's not to say it's the only thing we look at. We also, you know, particularly within Bibendum, which you know, we work with much smaller scale, it's much smaller volume, it's quite London centric. We are, you know, for there we're looking for kind of more boutique and artisan producers as well. One thing that is always of benefit is any support in market. So whether that's having a UK representative or somebody who could support events and activity within the UK, working with our sales team and support in terms of education, but also spending time with our customers in trade, as well as at events and things that we run throughout the year, which are multiple and seasonal. And, you know, it makes such a big impact to have those personalities behind the wine who can represent them within our business to our customers. And this is not, you know, it's quite a unique thing to say women in wine, but you know, when we look at the number of producers within our portfolio, it's growing, which is a great thing, but there's not always, you know, numerous female winemakers or owners of wine businesses that run kind of the female line, and that's always a nice to have as well if it's there, and it's a story that we love to champion, particularly within Bibendum. So in terms of how best to approach an importer, I think utilising representatives such of Wines of Germany and FIPS is a great way to make an introduction. And I think Jamie touched on it as well, that we could all work together better as well. And I said to Connie earlier, you know, always feel free to share my details or send me contacts yourselves that have made touch with you, because it's a great way of kind of building that contact base. I think if you are going to contact buyers, it's quite often useful to do it around the time of a trade show, be it Provine, Wine Paris, London Wine Fair, because there's that immediate kind of contact point that you can make, as well as just an email or an introduction on a Zoom call or a Teams call like this. And perseverance as well. Just, you know, it might not be right now, but there's always opportunity in the future. The market is constantly changing and it's evolving. So although something might not be a right fit now, making contact and building on that and touching base every now and then can be a real positive. One thing I would say is that a kind of generic contact to just anybody tends to be filed and less sort of interaction would necessarily happen. So make it personal, know the name of the buyer that you're contacting, understand the company that you're researching. So, you know, make sure you understand the area of the market that we play with. Who do we already work with? Kind of where's a gap in our range that you can identify that you might be able to bring something new that we're not kind of currently representing with the producers that we're working with. You know, and something, you know, what's your USP? What's your unique story that's going to make you stand out in the UK market, which is crowded and challenging? And I think, you know, a crucial bit is how do your wines and how will you make not only, you know, good volume for you, but make us also sell more wine and win share of market, which ultimately is kind of, you know, beneficial for both of us.
So I'll skip over this quickly because Nikki's already talked through the GB rates for duty, but yeah, just to underline that ABV now does matter in the way that it didn't in before, and this just highlights the difference in shelf retail price for a wine depending on its alcohol, going from, you know, £8 initially up to £8.12 with increasing duty rates, full stop. But then if the wine was 13.5%, it'll be £8.39. If it's 14.5%, it'll be £8.65. So, you know, it's something that really matters. I will just touch very quickly on low and no alcohol as well, because we've talked about those, and I think they are increasing as categories, but I guess a little bit of a word of caution in that no alcohol wine hasn't been as successful as other categories of no alcohol, i.e. beer and spirits. That's and us as a business, we've never really got massively behind no alcohol wine, and the reason fundamentally for that is lack of quality. So, you know, when you actually look at multiple retail data for repeat purchases, the repeat purchase data is pretty bad. And although this sector is growing, I think, you know, producing no alcohol wine that tastes good is much more challenging than producing no alcohol beer and spirits that taste good. And so I think until maybe there's further technological advances, I think we're possibly always going to be fighting a slight uphill battle with no alcohol wine. Lower alcohol wine is more interesting. It is an area that's growing. It's still very small, and retailers are still very much experimenting with what they do in this area and how much consumers actually want it. But it's an area which is definitely a watch out for the future. And I think in on trade as well, I think, you know, probably even more watch and learn, because I think at the moment we're not necessarily 100% sure how much the consumer actually wants, you know, sort of 6, 7, 8% wine when they go out, or actually when they go out, do they just want full fat, if you like. And maybe when they buy from retail, maybe that's when they'll buy into lower ABV wine. So I think it's a watch and see how it evolves area. The pricing area example that's on the screen is just basically showing you how your ex-seller or FCA cost transfers into both a restaurant list cost and an independent retail price. So you can see, just looking at just 3 examples there, one for a wine of €2, one for 5, one for 8. And you can use the same principles for any cost. So obviously we convert it to GBP. We then add on the cost of freight, port overhead. So port is our central warehouse in the UK, so we add on cost for that. If we're distributing it throughout the network into different warehouses, we then add a further cost as well. And obviously different importers and distributors will have different levels of costs for this. Ours are relatively low because of our size and scale. So this number, although it's in here as 6p, could be anything up to 30, 40p a bottle in terms of additional cost at that stage. Valpack is basically something to do with waste packaging. So we'll refer to it in a minute because things have changed a little bit here and the costs are increasing. But we have to add a cost to cover our obligation for recycling, essentially. Then obviously we add the duty, and that gets us to a price which our sales team use to sell. We've assumed 20% margin for us as a distributor. And then you can see the levels of margin that we assume for restaurants and independent retail. Now, these, of course, can vary depending on the outlet in question. We've used an example of 70% margin for a restaurant, which is not unusual. Some big national on-trade outlets make up to 80% margin, which makes it quite difficult to get to a sensible price point for consumer, but that's the reality of the costs that they face and have to recoup as well within the UK. And then independent retail, again, we've used an assumption of 30% margin. Again, different people will take different approaches, and sometimes some of the cleverer people will reduce that margin for more expensive wines so that they still maintain or make more cash, but have a greater opportunity to sell those more premium wines. So these are examples. It's a benchmark set of how you get from a FCA or ex-cellar cost to a restaurant list and independent retail cost. But I think it's really important to be thinking about this when you're thinking about not just the UK market, but any market, in terms of where's your cost, what's that going to translate into for an independent retail shelf price or restaurant list price? And then how does that compare with your competitors? Where does that put you within the competition, not just for German wine, but also then versus international competition as well? And does that fit? Because getting your pricing right in the market is, obviously a key factor in the success of the wine, both for you and for us as a distributor.
Okay, so it's a bit of a full-on slide, this one, and I'm afraid quite dry content. So I think it's one that you can kind of look over in your own time when the full presentation is sent across. But this is just to indicate some of the complications and headwinds that we are experiencing in the UK market in terms of some of the regulation piece that we have to comply to. We're very fortunate that we have a technical team that makes up part of the wider wine team within C&C who support our producers on navigating this in the UK. Not only do they support our suppliers, they support us as well in kind of understanding our role in all of this. So there's numerous ones that are kind of in motion at the moment, but just a couple to point out is the deposit return scheme, which is on a refundable deposit, which will need to be applied on packaging that is PET or aluminium. It is something that has been talked about for glass as well on a wider scale, which I imagine in time may well come into play. So enhanced producer responsibility. This is part of the Valpack that Jamie was just talking about. So it's this cost to cover recyclable goods, which will play a part. And then a big thing that we're working with our producers on at the moment is health warnings on labels in Ireland. So that's increased legislation for the back label of health warnings that have to be indicated in Ireland. So that's all, another level of kind of something to navigate when looking to work in the UK market. And then finally, I guess kind of why is the UK market kind of so important, why it remains kind of a go-to place for a lot of producers across across the world. So the UK is that shop window for the world. You know, we're the only country in the top 5 for wine consumption that doesn't have its own substantial wine industry. It was mentioned earlier, but you know, the vast majority of what we sell and enjoy and consume in the UK is imported from around the world, and it makes this a really unique market in that sense as well. London remains vibrant and diverse and kind of one of the best culinary hotspots in the world, and that's not to say that there aren't hotspots outside of London as well. You know, there's some very up and coming trendy cities, Manchester, Leeds, Bristol, that have real food kind of independent restaurant growing area that's of huge excitement. And you know, the consumer, we're spoilt in the UK. We have an expectation of variety in terms of price, style, and varietals and country of origin, and that will remain. So yeah, and I think that's it for us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
No, that's great. Super helpful. Thank you. And what you often find with these presentations is that people drift out the door towards the end. We've actually got more people in for your bits. So that's brilliant. Just before we sign off and before we ask if there's any questions, I just want to pop down a couple of slides to, I've got UK competitions. Rebecca was talking about accolades, and it's something that I really believe in as well. If you want a foot in the door and you want to sort of show your reputation and show the quality of your wine, these accolades and are really important, and competitions are a great way of demonstrating that. And basically there are 3 important ones that are globally recognized, but particularly in the UK. You've got the International Wine Challenge, the Decanter World Wine Awards, and the International Wine and Spirit Competition. They're all brilliant, but have a look at all of them and see if you're interested in entering. Well, I'd probably pick one to start with, but they're all great. And then for sparkling wine, you've got the Champagne and Sparkling Wine World Championships, headed by Tom Stevenson. And Germany famously never enter. And I would love to see some German sects entering these hugely important awards for champagne and sparkling wine. You've got the top sparkling wines and champagnes in the world all competing against each other, and it would be wonderful to get some German wines in there. That's it from me.
Thank you, Nikki. And thank you, Jamie and to Rebecca. We've got one question so far. So if anybody else has any additional questions, feel free to put them in the chat. The one question that we had is when we are talking about low alcohol wines on the market, what percentage of alcohol do they have?
My understanding, Annetta, is that they are 5.5%.
Okay.
I think the only thing I'd add into that is I think, as I said, it's a bit of an evolving piece in terms of what people deem to be lower alcohol, and the segment probably between 5.5% and 9% is a pretty new category, really, and a category which has been made more interesting by the changes in UK duty law to obviously give a cost advantage for product in that area. So yeah, I think there's legislation for what no alcohol wine is, but low alcohol wine is very much open to interpretation, and I think will probably evolve depending on the success of the segment.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that it is a sort of a movable feast at the moment. The data that I was presenting, they're basing it on 5.5 and under, yeah. And the LADs are 1.2% and under. But I think that there's a very interesting sort of future for anything, between 5.5 and 10, but nobody knows what that looks like yet.
No, or whether consumers actually want it.
Yeah.
And we had a follow-up question. Are those low alcohol wines sold as single varietal or as blends?
I'm just trying to think. Probably a
The
mix.
majority of the lower alcohol wines that we sell, so, and I'm talking wines here, which would be 8 or 9%. We don't do many of them at the moment, but the ones that we do are pretty much all single varietal. I think particularly at a lower price point, consumers, varietal is quite important in terms of their understanding of the wine. And I think if you were talking about a generic wine which was not labelled as varietal, I think you'd be fighting at a pretty low price point. So I think varietal is probably quite important.
Mm-hmm. What about alternative packaging, such as PET bottles instead of glass or bib? And what is the acceptance and trends of alternative packaging?
I think that's definitely something that's increasingly important. We've, as a buying team, Jamie's kind of given that responsibility to one person in the team to look at alternative packaging as a kind of overview of our entire range. And it is something that is, I think it was evident at Provine that there was a lot more conversation about sort of wine in can. I was recently talking to a member of our team about some wines that are coming over in aluminium bottles as well. So there's definitely a call for it. I think with PET, there's still probably an assumption of it being very much low value, entry level sort of wines. But I think the other packaging gives an opportunity for slightly higher quality as well, and an expectation of better value liquid as part of that. One thing that we've been trialing with some of our national customers is wine in keg, which is complicated and not necessarily the most sort of price efficient, but there's definitely a consumer interest in alternative packaging. Lighter weight glass is a huge thing. A lot of retailers now, when they put tenders out, there is a requirement of a maximum weight for the bottle. So lighter weight glass is definitely a very strong intermediary between that. We trialed some wine in paper bottles recently, not to great success, partly just because of the longevity of the product. And that's obviously something that in the wine world, we're used to having wines that for ageability and length of time on shelf or in warehouses and things. And so that is an area that I think technology will improve and it will help. So yeah, it's an area that's really interesting, but still growing. And I think we're still finding our feet of what works. Popping back to the aluminium bottles, I think an area with that is that you can't see the wine, and so much of the consumer, the look and feel and appeal of a wine, it is quite visual beyond just the label. It's, rosé is a perfect example. Lighter, pale rosés is a real pull for somebody choosing a rosé. If you can't see that in an aluminium bottle, that's definitely a bit of a barrier. So it's an interesting area. I think it's, I'd love to hear what producers are doing and what ideas they have to combat that, because it is something that our consumers are asking for, and I think will continue to grow.
Thank you. Yeah, I think as well that this is a topic that will be more relevant in the future, and that we also, especially with lighter glass, we also see in the Scandinavian markets with the monopolies that they are expecting this. So I think this is going to be a trend for the future in terms of sustainability, to think about alternatives too. So are there any other questions? So this would be your last chance. Otherwise, I would like to just briefly mention two other opportunities where all the producers can participate and meet all our agency representatives, which will be the Forum Export at the 4th of June in Nackenheim, where we have a couple of presentations on export topics and where you have the opportunity to meet the representatives of all our foreign agencies. So this would be another chance to ask your questions. And on the 8th of May, we have the online Sprechtag following our session today with Connie and Nikki. So if you have any individual questions that you would like to discuss with the Ones of Germany team, feel free to do that. We'll resend the link for the registration with our email that we will send after the session today. So you can register there and then make individual appointments with Connie and Nikki and discuss your questions that you may have. So if there are not any additional questions, then I would like to thank you all, Jamie, Rebecca, Connie, and Nikki, for your time and sharing your knowledge with us. And that was very useful, a lot of information. I think it's good that producers will have the chance to read that again and to digest that a little bit. And as I said, if there are any additional questions, you can always reach out to the team in London or to us here at the DWI. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time, and see you soon.